and welcome students, distinguished guests to this wonderful event. I am so excited because I've been in Montana State for a very, very long time. I'm not going to give the date because it might be a little embarrassing, and I know you can all do math in an instant. But when I first started, Governor Racicot was the governor of the state of Montana. So it's so wonderful for this generation of students to have an opportunity to hear you this afternoon. So allow me just a few words. I have the privilege of serving as the Dean of the Honors College. And in addition to our distinguished guest, I would like to recognize two individuals who are in the audience, two deans. I would like to invite Dean Dan Miller of the Jake Jab School of Business to please stand and be recognized. Dean Miller is also from Libby, where our distinguished speaker is from. And I also saw the Dean of the Graduate School, Craig Ogilvie, come in. Craig, would you please stand and be recognized? There you go. I've been doing a lot of publicity for our graduate school. I would like you to know that. And then my predecessor, Professor Mike Miles, is here. Professor Miles was the director of the Honors College and hired me back a couple of years ago, just a few years. Mike, thank you for being there. It means a lot to us. This afternoon, our distinguished speaker, Governor Racicot, served as the governor of the great state of Montana from 1993 to 2001. During his terms as governor, he actively supported higher education in the state of Montana. Thank you, Governor Racicot, for your part in building this university system and your hand in the success of Montana State University and our sister university, the University of Montana. Thank you for your support over the years. Thank you also for this afternoon, setting an example for our students of what it means to be a public servant. Access to public education combined with a culture of public service, to me, are the building blocks and the cornerstones of a great democracy. This afternoon belongs to our students. We have an Honors Presents team, and this team of students organize events for the Honors College and the wider university every week. This week we have 2 events, and next week 3. It's an extraordinary team of students, and students, I would love for you to stand if you would. Cade, Macaulay, and then we also have Maeve over here. Thank you for working so hard to bring distinguished speakers to our university. Thank you. Who just walked in, President Cruzado. I know that you have a very busy schedule, but you took time to come and welcome our distinguished guest, President Cruzado.
So good afternoon, and thank you so much, Tina Olson, Marie. And good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to your university and to this very special occasion. I just wanted to stop by to welcome Governor Marc Racicot to Montana State University. There are many important things, many important contributions during his tenure, but as we were reminded yesterday, there is a special place in every Board of Regents meeting. There is a chair for the governor of the state of Montana. Normally, because of governor's very busy schedules, that chair is occupied by a representative from the executive branch, a representative from the governor. With every governor, except with Governor Racicot, who took the time at every meeting, I've been told, to attend the deliberations and important conversations with regents, with faculty, with students and staff. So while I was not blessed with the opportunity to work during his tenure, I'm the recipient of many of the blessings and benefits that your administration conferred upon the Montana University system. So I just wanted to come and say, welcome to your university, Montana State. Thank you for your service, and go Cats.
Thank you for coming. President Cruzado, Governor Racicot shared with me that he always wanted to be a bobcat. There we go. I would now like to invite Cade Fitterman to the stage. With the Honors Presents team, there's always a student that takes the lead with bringing a speaker to our campus. So Cade, thank you for bringing Governor Racicot to our university.
Well, Well, thank you all for being here today. It is really an honor for me to be able to, with the Honors Presents team, to bring people like him here and share them with all of you. And thank you all for taking time out of your day to come here and be with us. So we begin by acknowledging with honor and respect the Indigenous nations on whose traditional territories the university now stands, and whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. We also acknowledge the elders past and present, including MSU's current Council of the Elders, and humbly ask for their guidance. The Valley of the Flowers has been and remains a place of learning for Native American peoples who for millennia have passed ways of knowing, being, and doing from one generation to the next. While a land acknowledgement is not enough, it is an important decolonial practice and promotes Indigenous visibility and a reminder that we are settled on Indigenous land. Without further ado, I would like to invite our student body president, Norris Blossom. Norris is a junior studying industrial engineering and economics. Outside of class, he has served as an Honors College ambassador, economics research assistant, and a member of the Pure Gold Award Committee.
Kate, thanks so much for the intro. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Norris Blossom. As Kate said, I have the great honor of serving as the student body president this year. I also have the privilege to introduce our guest, Governor Racicot, tonight. There's so much great things to say, so buckle in, because it's like you're going to be blown away. Here we go. Mr. Racicot served as the president and CEO of the American Insurance Corporation from 2005 to 2009. Prior to that, he was a partner at the law firm of Bracewell LLP from 2001 to 2005. He is a former governor of Montana, serving 2 terms from 1993 to 2001, and serving as Montana's Attorney General prior to that. Mr. Racicot was nominated by President Bush to serve as the chairman of the Republican National Committee in 2002, prior to assuming the position of chairman of the Bush-Cheney Re-Election Committee in 2003. He has previously served on the board of directors for Siebel Systems, Massachusetts Mutual Life Insurance Company, Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway, Plum Creek Timber Company, Allied Capital Corporation, Avista Corporation, and Wirehouse Company. In addition, Mr. Racicot has served on the Board of Jobs for America's Graduates and as a member of the Board of Visitors for the University of Montana School of Law. Throughout his career, Mr. Racicot has committed himself to children and community issues. He was appointed to the Board of Directors for the Corporation of National and Community Service by President Clinton, and has also served on the boards of Carroll College and the Lewis and Clark United Way in Helena, Montana. As well, Racicot is a past chairman of America's Promise, the Alliance for Youth. Mr. Racicot grew up in northwestern Montana, attending Libby High School, where he led the high school basketball team to its first state championship. He also played basketball and football in Helena for Carroll College. At Carroll, Mr. Racicot was elected student body president, and in 1970 set a record for most assists in a basketball game. 32. A record that still stands to this day. He graduated in 1970 with a degree in English, and later that year married Teresa Barber, a Carroll student from Big Timber, Montana. Soon after, he enrolled in the University of Montana School of Law in Missoula, receiving his Juris Doctorate degree in 1973. As an Army ROTC graduate, Mr. Racicot was immediately assigned to the Judge Advocate General Corps and stationed in what was then West Germany, where he served as chief prosecutor for the largest military jurisdiction in Europe. While there, he also taught business and criminal law for the University of Maryland. After returning to Montana, he was elected Attorney General in 1988, taking office in January 1989. In 1992, he sought the Republican governor nomination with Lieutenant Governor Dennis Reberg, a Billings area rancher. After winning a hard-fought primary campaign, they ran a successful general election race that led to a narrow 51% victory in November 1992. In 1996, he sought re-election to his second and final term with Judy Martz, a Butte businesswoman, as his running mate. On November 5th, in 1996, they were overwhelmingly elected with 79% of the vote, the largest winning percentage for any governor in Montana's history, and the largest winning percentage for any U.S. governor in 1996. Sorry, 1996. Mr. Racicot presently serves on the board of Providence St. Patrick's Hospital in Missoula, Montana, and the Mansfield Center at the University of Montana. From all the students at Montana State University, we are so excited to welcome Marc Racicot.
Give me just 1 second here to prepare technologically. I think this will work if I put it in my pocket. Well, good afternoon. I feel quite privileged, to be very honest with you, to be invited to appear in front of the Honors College and those who are interested in talking about America, talking about your lives, talking about the life of the Republic. I'm particularly delighted to be here with my lovely daughter, Teresa, who's an MSU graduate and a proud graduate at that. Did very well while she was here, and now a successful businesswoman in the city of Bozeman. You know, I was trying to think to myself, what is it that I could possibly offer that might be relevant to all of you? And that's an onus, a burden that sometimes is difficult to discern and even more difficult to respond to. It reminded me of a story about relevance and about connection that took place in a kindergarten, actually the Head Start Center in Helena, Montana. While I was working in state government, I was invited to come and read to the kindergarten class. And they wanted to have an opportunity to display their level of knowledge in a variety of different topics and subjects. And so a little girl got up and her presentation went something like this. She said, the body of the human being is composed of a lot of different parts. She said, there's first of all the chest, and that's where the heart is. And she said, and then there's the head, and that's where the brain is. And she said, and then there's the stomach, and that's where the bowels are. And there are 5 bowels, A, E, I, O, and U. And it made me realize that frequently it can be difficult to get on the same wavelength. And my intention here, Kay did not give me specific directions to pursue, but we talked generally about the fact that you obviously have people very, very much inclined to be looking toward the future. And what is it that you could offer that might be relevant to them? So at the end of the day, you'll be the judges of whether or not this was a relevant presentation. And hopefully you find something more than the 5 vowels that were previously articulated. At the same time that I was thinking about presenting to you today, the notion came across, kind of weaving through my mind, that there was a show when I was a youngster. It was called It's Your Life. And the premise of the show was, and I'm sure Mike Miles probably recalled it as well, we're basically of the same age, even though he's slightly older than I am, much, much wiser than I am. The premise was that they would take an ordinary citizen of the state of Montana, take a look at what they had done in their life, and then they would surprise them by inviting them to the show, and then read about their accomplishments. And it started on the radio. The year I was born in 1948. It progressed for 4 years in 1952, and then ultimately it made its way onto television. And the premise, as I explained to you, was quite dramatic, even when you would listen to it on the radio, which I did when I was very, very young. But then seeing it on TV, of course, it was much more colorful and much more easy to understand. When I was thinking about that show, it kind of has application to all of you. I was thinking about my own life. What have I done in my own life? How did I do it? Where did I get the insight or the sense of direction about what path and what road I would pursue? And it seemed to me that that was a relevant thing for you to be thinking about as well. I'm 73 years old now. It's gone very, very quickly. And my suggestion to you would be, where do you want to be? What do you want to have done when you reach the age of 73? It's almost like a Beatles song. And so that really is what I'd like to talk about today. And I'm going to fill in a couple of gaps that Norris provided me the opportunity to fill in as he went over the biography. Not because I want to talk about all of the things that were a part of exciting times for me, as much as to share them with you and to let you see that inside all of that are a lot of accidents, a lot of coincidences, and a lot of opportunities that are not based on luck, they're based on preparation. And they're based upon the notion that you have a goal that you want to pursue. So I grew up in a large family in Libby, Montana. My first memory of a house that we lived in probably carries me back to 4 years of age, and I can remember all of us living in that house. And we had an outhouse, as a matter of fact, where that's how modern the accommodations were. That thing scared the living daylights out of me because I was not all that tall, and it looked to me to be a long way down inside that receptacle, and as a consequence, I used to get a little bit fearful. I grew up, I'm the oldest of 7 children. I have 5 brothers and a sister, and the first 5 of those brothers are within 6 years of age because there was a set of twins. And then I had an adopted brother who's, my brother Philip, came to us from Korea when he was 3 years old. And this is back in the early 50s. It was a rare occurrence, but we were quite charmed by his presence within the family. You can imagine what it was like for a mother with 5 boys within a period of time of 6 years of age to guide and direct all of us with the kind of care that she exhibited without a great deal of effort. In fact, she would tell us later in our aging process that there were many years of her life she didn't even remember as a result of being so busy. And my father was a basketball coach. He coached at Libby High School, grew up in Libby largely, and then went through high school in Thompson Falls, and then went off to college, the Marine Corps, all of the things that men of that generation were doing. Came back, married my mother, started this family, and we lived in Libby, Montana, a long, long ways from anywhere. No television, no radio that we really listened to in those days. And so it started out simple. I wouldn't call it deprived at all. It was a very, very rich setting. And within that setting, I saw parents that were engaged in their community, people of service. My mother ultimately taking in foster children, typically babies. And over the course of time, she took in 50 different babies for a period of time, typically between 2 weeks and 6 weeks of age. And she nurtured them, and then, of course, when it came time for them to be placed with a family, there was great sadness, and we went through this process repetitively, and we were all engaged. We could all change diapers, all 5 of those older 5 boys. We could all feed the baby, and were expected to. We could be involved with keeping them quiet when those things were necessary, rocking them, trying to help them go to sleep. So that's a marker in my life when I try to look back and think to myself, what is it that led you to become involved in the things that you were doing? Ultimately, a political life and a life of working on behalf of the people of the state of Montana and ultimately people across the country. What were the markers that indicated that that might be something that would be relevant later in your life? Well, watching my parents be of service, watching how they cared for their children, watching how they didn't have much, but what they had they made very good use of, led me, obviously, if not expressly, I certainly assume, to a decision-making process that was relevant to me, and that was I wanted to do some of the same things. Thereafter, of course, I went to school, as was mentioned, and when I got out of law school, I wanted to fulfill my military obligation. In those days, young men had a military obligation to fulfill, and we all did it in one fashion or another. And In the Army, I learned a lot about discipline and a lot about goals and objectives and pursuing them and working toward them and never giving up and making certain that you were in a position to be able to pursue those kinds of things that you thought might be of benefit to the people you lived with. So out of that atmosphere came another marker, a marker of staying focused and making certain that you had a defined objective and that you would pursue it with a great deal of diligence and recognizing you didn't control all of the events, but you were certainly capable of influencing the choices that you made. So how did I get into politics? Politics seemed to me to be a close and very real opportunity to continue to be of service. I saw my parents being of service. I experienced the joy of providing service in the military. When I came back to Montana after having been gone for 3 years, I went to work in the county attorney's office, again as a prosecutor, and I spent the next 12 years thereafter doing that same thing, traveling around the state of Montana, trying criminal cases. So then the political career part began in the midst of all of that. I decided that I wanted to see if I could ultimately fulfill the role of a judge in the state of Montana. So in 1980, I filed for office, a position on the Montana Supreme Court. I was 32 years old, and ultimately the race did not turn out all that successful for me, except that it provided me a great deal of opportunity and a great amount of, I think, ability to recognize what it is that you had to do in order to be a public servant in the state of Montana, the people of Montana. I lost. I lost again in 1982, and I lost again in 1984. All 3 times running for judicial office. And each one of those occasions is a heartbreaking experience. I don't know how many of you have been involved in political campaigns. I know this young woman has been involved in a lot of political campaigns. But you work for 18 months, and you drive around the state of Montana, and you pass out literature, and you go to every place that there are 2 or more gathered in your name or otherwise, and you try to make certain that you can spread the word as far and wide as you possibly can. So at the end of my first 3 attempts at running for public office, I failed. And as a consequence of that, there are some who might suggest, well, maybe that was enough. Maybe you got the message. But frankly, I didn't. I would look back over those races and I would think to myself, I think the people of Montana made the right call. Even when they did not allow me the opportunity to serve in one of those positions. I don't think I was probably mature enough. I probably wasn't experienced enough. I had a lot of enthusiasm about the potentialities of being able to do the job. But in the end, when I would look back, I realized that they were probably correct. So in 1988, after a 6-year hiatus from running for public office, a 4-year hiatus, I decided to run again. And my father was dying of cancer at the time, and he had been involved in all of my campaigns, from a very rudimentary level to providing me a great deal of advice and counsel. And when I came to him, he was actually confined at that point in time to a bed, but completely cogent and aware of everything going on around him. And I told him I was going to run, I thought, for another position. And this time it was going to be a partisan race. And he couldn't understand why, after having tried and lost 3 times, I would try again. And I said, well, I just think there's a place out there for me, somewhere. I don't know precisely where it is, but I honestly believe there's a place for me. And secondly, I want to be of service. I don't want to privately practice law. I want to work for the people that I live with. And so he was a strong Democrat, according to his assertions over the course of time. And I said, well, you know, running again is not the worst news. And he said, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, I'm going to run as a Republican. And he called upon the Lord in his own unique way and said, why would you do that? And I said, you know, I don't think I really knew what I was. You know, I voted in every election, but I'm not certain I ever voted a straight ballot. So as a consequence of that, I read the platforms of both parties. I studied. I looked at the information available at their positions. And I said, I felt more comfortable running in one as opposed to the other. And that's how I made the decision. It's kind of like how I decided to major in English. You'll never believe this, recognizing how responsible I've been. I counted up all the credits that I had at the end of my sophomore year, and I had more in English than anything else. So I became an English major, and never regretted it because I loved words and I loved creative writing, and it has served me exceptionally well over the years. But he said to me that he just simply couldn't understand, and I tried to explain it to him. About 3 or 4 months later, he was not improving, and it was apparent that he was going to pass on, and he looked at me. I was the only one in the room with him at the time. And he opened his eyes, and the last thing he said to me was, I voted for Ronald Reagan. And I said, well, you old, and then he opened his eyes again, and the last thing he said to me was, twice. So, again, lessons learned. Lessons learned not to be afraid, not to be fearful, and to stay true to your convictions, even if sometimes it feels like you're running against the wind. Those are the kinds of things that, as I look back, when I look back at my life, that profoundly influenced me in a lot of different ways, but that I didn't know were occurring at the time. After winning the Attorney General's race by a very narrow margin, I was intending to run for office again, that office again. Didn't have an opponent. And Stan Stevens, the governor, became ill and decided not to seek re-election. So after a great deal of discussion and some coercion by various different principals that were involved in trying to encourage people to run for office, I decided to run for the office of governor. It was a very difficult decision. I mean, I was the father of 5 children. We had an adequate income. If I lost, that meant I had no job, and I had a lot of mouths to feed, and so there was some substantial amount of risk associated with it. But nonetheless, I thought it was the right thing to pursue, and did pursue it. And as Norris mentioned, it was by a narrow margin that I escaped the hangman's noose, and I was accorded the privilege of serving the people of the state of Montana. It was a glorious job. It was something that I could hardly wait to get up to every day, and something that I felt made a difference, even though not always in large ways, and nonetheless, in my view, was worthy of my time, more than worthy of my time, and I was privileged to be able to labor in those fields for the next 8 years. And thereafter, I went on to participate in national politics. But through all of this, what I've learned is, and Dean Lee has indicated that to a certain extent as we began this discussion, and that is that the education and the civic culture that we have created in this country, and sometimes I would assert to you, I would suggest to you, is taken for granted these days, has led me to a place now in my aging years where I have trepidation about the future. And I want to share that trepidation with you because I think that you are charged as the next generation, the next person in line, the next man or woman up, to make certain that doesn't happen. I think our democracy, let me go back to the beginning, 1787, and the formation of our Constitution. You know, they weren't convening to create a Constitution. They were convening in Philadelphia that summer in order to make certain that they refined the Articles of Confederation, which was a loose description of a form of government that didn't allow them to pay their troops if they had a military conflict. They couldn't borrow money, they couldn't raise money, and as a consequence they were gathering in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787 to make certain that they could do something about changing the Articles of Confederation. 117 days later, they responded after being virtually in seclusion for those 117 days with the Constitution of the United States of America. Now, it surely was not a perfect document, but it was an extraordinary accomplishment. And it took about a third of the time for that to be ratified by the requisite number of states than it took to ratify the Articles of Confederation, which really provided little more than an identity for each one of the individual states in the Union. When Benjamin Franklin came out of the Constitutional Convention, and if you read the transcripts, you can see how they struggled, how they worked so hard to try and figure out what it is that they could do that was in the best interests of the people they served. And at the end of the day, really what occurred was compromise. Now, in some quarters these days, that could be a word of suspicion or a word that communicates somehow a weak position. But in actuality, the process of compromise is the beauty of democracy and the beauty of a republic. And when Benjamin Franklin came out of that meeting after 117 days, he was 81. And he substantially tilted the age scale in terms of the average age. I think the average age was still 46, but there were members of the Constitutional Convention that were 26, 28, 30, 32. Thomas Jefferson, in my memory, was under 30, below the age of 30 when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. So your turn is just around the corner. And you should be ready for it, and you should be fearless about it, and you should be inclined toward those principles, I think, of leadership that were evinced and articulated by the work of the founders of the nation. They were patient with each other. There were no devices allowed inside the deliberations room. There were no opportunities to speak endlessly, no filibusters. You could speak once until everyone had had a chance to speak. No newspapers, no media, no outside influence, just constant deliberations, discussions. And you know as well as I do, I think, and if you don't, think about whether or not what I'm going to posit to you, in fact, is true. When people, regardless of whether or not they know one another, get together in a room and they look at each other in the eye, there's a number of different things that are taking place. You're summing up, you're evaluating, you're doing it right now. You're doing it with me. I'm doing it with you. Are you interested? Are you not interested? Maybe some of you are. Is there anything relevant here? Does he know what he's talking about? Where has he been? What has he done? Who gives him the right to be able to articulate or pontificate about these various different issues? So the ability to be together as human beings, created by our Creator, regardless of your religious belief, nonetheless we know that we're all similar in a lot of different ways. I happen to believe that the innate nature of human beings is optimistic. It's good. It's inclined toward good. And it's only when there are obstructions or delusions or distractions that that ever changes. But unfortunately, it's incredibly tempting for that to occur. But back to Benjamin Franklin, I brought this up twice before. When he left, somebody said to him, well, what have we got? A monarchy or a republic? And he said, you have a republic if you can keep it. And my belief is today that that question, or that answer, is as important as it was in 1787, and even more so, because there are some real questions about whether or not this republic, which depends upon each one of us to, for ourselves, decide how it is that we are going to conduct our affairs in concert with and with respect of other people to survive as a nation. I mean, really think about it. You can't order a democracy. It doesn't happen. It happens by choice. It happens by individuals choosing freedom day after day after day. And it happens almost automatically. And it happens in a way that it makes it seem like it's here forever. But I would suggest to you that it's not, unless we take care of it, unless we nurture it, unless we glorify those aspects of our way of life in a way that makes it attractive, unless we get to a point where we presume the best of other people until such time as they demonstrate they're not entitled to the presumption. That's what leadership is all about. Leadership is about humility, recognizing you do not know everything. You are not going to have power over everything. That seeking power is a hollow game. And at the end of the day, what you want are results. And how can you best contribute to those results in a way that benefits the people you live with? Now, my belief would be every single one of you, even though you may not have stopped to think about it and articulate it, tries to set about to do something that is good for humanity and good for your neighbor and good for yourself. And at the conclusion of that process, even if you only accomplish it halfway, you nonetheless feel the satisfaction of having contributed to something that means something. So when you're 73, accumulating all those acts and making them as large as you can without creating a notion of self-importance coursing through your own veins, you are going to conclude that yes, my life meant something, that this is my life. So we don't all end up with our name in lights. The marquee is not going to display every single name of every single leader. But leaders proceed quietly, not bombastically. They take into consideration the notions and feelings of other people. They try to find a way for people to get over till tomorrow. That sounds almost trite, but it's not. Because you solve nothing forever. There will always be more problems tomorrow. There will always be another budget tomorrow. There will be another piece of legislation tomorrow. So you're focused on today, and you're focused on how to get the people that you live with, care about, and love from one place to another that's in their best interest and that they agree with. It's not impossible. It was done in 1787. That was an imperfect document. It was an imperfect meeting. They didn't provide for everything. Slavery wasn't even mentioned in the document. So we have gone all of these years now with all of these misunderstandings and sometimes incredible tragedy and pain, and we come right back to one of the same problems that was there when the nation was founded, that we have to solve. You have to solve. All of us have to solve. So as you pursue your lives focused upon those disciplines and those areas of interest that you have, every single one of your lives is going to be infused with those leadership responsibilities. I would suggest to you that everybody that chooses, when you think about it, how bizarre is it that we have some of these arguments and difficulties in this day and age today in such powerfully damaging terms and just bitter rhetoric, when we do things like stop at stop signs without even thinking about it. Why do you stop at a stop sign? Just because you don't want to get hit? Or is it also because you don't want anybody else to get hit? You all recognize the reason for it, that there are some seminal notions and facts and beliefs in life that we all share. Or put a seatbelt on. There was a big battle when I first became Attorney General about whether or not we were going to make seatbelts mandatory. It was huge. People were furious. And today, nobody even thinks about it. You put on your seatbelt. I would suggest to you there are a lot of issues we're confronting today that certainly have been revealed by the pandemic that you could say the same thing about. They're really not all that large a burden. And they really do have some benefit if you believe in scientific examination, discovery, and conclusion, which I would suspect all of you do, or you would not be here in this room. So how is it that we get to the point to where we simply cannot talk through these things and come to a thoughtful, resolute conclusion without so many fatalities along the way? And I think that's the challenge for us going forward. The leadership challenge for us going forward is, how do we keep our civic culture civic? And how do we make certain that we recognize the delicacy of this form of government? It's not going to survive. It won't survive unless people can talk to each other reasonably and thoughtfully and decently without the kind of recrimination or effort to make people pay or the exercise of power being the only objective. It just won't work at the end of the day. So the future needs you, and whether or not you are satisfied at the close of your time on the stage, which is where I am now, is going to depend on what you do between now and then. And I would suggest to you that the notions of leadership that you ought to pursue are not the lights on the marquee, not what's most popular, but those kinds of things that are simple values. Exuding humility, presuming the best of others, listening to what they have to say, respecting their point of view, recognizing that even though you may not get 100% of what you want, if you get 60% is way more than what you have. And keeping things civil so that there's a tomorrow, so there's a day that is available to you to make decisions about what happens in your family, what happens in your relationships, what happens in your state, your county, your city, your country, what happens in your world. That's the modern day challenge. Now, corrupting all of this, in my view, is the internet, that miracle of miracles. It is so edgy and so angry that we cannot depend upon it as our sole means of communication. And if we do, we're going to suffer the consequences. I mentioned to you earlier, all of you in this room, people of goodwill, sizing me up, me sizing you up, listening, trying to find some space for agreement, not agreeing with typically everything, but still in a posture of being restrained, disciplined, looking for an opportunity to add a contribution that may be relevant. That's how a republic stays alive. It's not with this modern day flow of tweets and twits and everything else in between. And if we depend on that solely, if we do not move away from that form of communication, then we're going to regret it deeply. Let me tell you about how presidential campaigns worked when I was there, and it'll give you a demonstrated example of how drastically things have changed. First of all, when I ran for office, I got in my pickup truck. I hoped that it would run every day that I was driving. And I would go every place. I drove every highway in the state of Montana for 18 months. And I passed out my literature, and I went to doors. Some were incredibly welcoming. Most were more than tolerant, but not all of them in agreement. And I would take my children to parades. This little girl marched in so many parades, she never wants to see another one. And and then we lost. But that's how it was done. That's the commitment you made. And you have to recognize you didn't own the process. You only owned the first decision, and that was, did you want to get involved? Everything else was up to the people you lived with and to the Almighty. And so you took your chances. In the presidential, that's the way it was all the time I ran for office. I didn't have a computer in my office the day I left. It wasn't available. So there were no communiques to me electronically because it wasn't possible. Seems not all that long ago, but that's the year 2000, 2001 I actually left. Presidential campaign in 2000, we had a war room, we called it, an unfortunate moniker, quite frankly, where we had 25, 30 people your age or a little bit older, monitoring every single newspaper, every single vehicle for the expression of public information in America. TV talk shows, newspapers, and they were all from a different point of view. And we would assimilate that over the course of the night. And then we would present that, usually about 55, 60 pages, to the principals, to the candidate, and the vice candidate. And then we would structure how it is we're going to respond to those things, because inevitably, they get things wrong. And you wanted to correct the record so that everyone understood it. With the electronic media today, we don't even have a record. I mean, you've got all this stuff, but who can figure out what happened and what didn't? In those days, we could. So we try to work with the media representatives and straighten up the record throughout half of the day. The second half of the day, we try to advance our agenda and talk about those things that were positive. So that's all changed. Now it's nothing but electronic communications. I mean, you can give these devices to a bunch of renegades out in the hinterlands, and they can put together, communicate, and have a event organized in the afternoon, all based upon very impulsive thinking and short phrases and limited number of characters. Well, that doesn't help the system. And so my belief is, if we don't get away from relying on that, I mean, these people show up to work, members of Congress, members of legislators, they're already angry because they've just got done reading all of their texts and all of their Twitter messages. So before they even start, and how many times do you see people even in committee rooms anymore? I think at the state level that happens quite frequently. City and county level, it still happens all the time. And you don't see near the angry and bitter approach to the resolution of problems in those forms of government, in those lower forms of government. So a lot of things to think about, and a lot of opinions that I've rendered. But I'd like to hear from you. I don't want to talk at you. So if we could take the rest of the time, and you could cross-examine me, and I could hear from you. And maybe out of all of this, you'll find something relevant.
Yes, so my name is Atticus Cummings, and I'm a student senator here at MSU. And I was wondering, given what you just talked about, communication in national politics, and I guess I'm curious if you have any ideas or suggestions as to how, in your ideal world, how it would be run. If communication, through the internet is now not functioning in the way we would like, how do you propose that it function?
Well, I would start at the top. Well, one of the first things, if I were to come on it, and I'm not, but if it was a decision solely that I was invested the authority to make, one of the first things I'd do is do away with partisan primary election. And I would go to, some states do already, they go to an election system where the two highest vote getters go on to the general election. that would eliminate a lot of the competitive fury of partisan campaigns from the very beginning in the primary season, where everyone is trying to outdo everyone else. Everyone is trying to be a better Republican than the other Republican. So I think that would be helpful as an overall umbrella of possibility. But I honestly believe what we need to do is get back to committee hearings and meetings, and that we need to present evidence, and we need to present argument in a way that is listened to by those who are charged with making the decision. I was earlier today over in Helena, and I testified at the Redistricting Commission hearing. And there's a lot of different theories and a lot of different calculations that have been made. But I'm absolutely convinced that those commissioners are doing their level best to try and come up with a system that, first of all, meets number requirements. I mean, the Supreme Court has told us that numbers, at the end of the day, are a very, very decisive factor. So you've got to have proportionality in the districts. They can't be outnumbered one or another. Secondly, they need to be fairly drawn. And that means you can't draw a district in the shape of a question mark, just so that you think you can achieve some perceived advantage. And that's another one of those leadership principles. Quit trying to embed within the rules advantages that benefit only you. I mean, that's not fair. It's not right. It's not the American way. It's not how the Republic was founded. And as a consequence, it is incredibly aggravating, and it gets people off on a junket. They get way far away from the intersection they're in because they pursue something that was a feint. It was something that really didn't have a central purpose. But I would start with very simple rules, and that is that the dean referred to earlier, going to Board of Regents meetings. Yeah, I went to every one of them because I wanted to know what was going on. I wanted to listen. I wanted to understand what they had to say. And when I understood what that, it's almost like people are afraid to understand what you are communicating. They're almost afraid to take in something that runs contrary to their own impression. We have to change the way we think if we're going to, and get back to those archaic days where we actually had public hearings, and we presented evidence, and we listened to opinion, and then we debated. I've been in those hearings. For years I was in those hearings. Spent weeks. And there were times I was so exhausted I thought, my God, how can anybody keep talking? And then I would find myself talking. But I think out of that, even the exhaustion of it all, you come to a position that's fair. I was so convinced. I tried a lot of cases in this state. For the first 15 years I was in the Attorney General's office. And I came to trust completely juries. I mean, even if they didn't find my way, I'd look back and I could see, yeah, this was missing. That's probably something that they were concerned about. I was disappointed horribly. I believed that I'd done the right analysis. I believed I'd presented the right case. And I believed that they reached the wrong verdict. But then when I had the calm of the day behind me to take a look at it, I would come to the conclusion, yeah, I can see why they did that. So I've always trusted juries implicitly. They come from every walk of life. They donate their time. They could get out of it if they wanted to. They answer the questions honestly. They sit and they listen. They don't talk to each other about the case until they've heard all of the information. They have life and death within their power in many instances. And yet they sit down and make a decision that almost without exception, and I'm talking about hundreds of cases, was correct. And that, I think, is the infallibility of the collective human endeavor of living together. When you live apart, it's not going to happen. And so I would insist on those things that keep us together in the same room, breathing the same air, taking the same risks, and making certain we're doing our level best to listen and start out with a clean slate, to presume their innocence, presume their good faith. Doesn't mean you can't find fault in the process, doesn't mean you can't disagree. But my guess is the level of disagreement stays focused on the object under consideration rather than being some tangential remnant of whatever argument it was you had in the last text string. So there'd be simple rules that I would encourage, and most of them have to do with people being humble, studying hard, realizing they don't own the process. You're only here a little while. I can tell you, I thought I was going to be here a long time. No, it goes fast. And so do the kinds of things that last. I mean, what lasts for you are the people you love, the people that are your children, the things that they do, the accomplishments they have, the pains that they experience. Those are the things that matter. So let's reorder our priorities. But one person can't do it. You know, I can go out and talk myself blue in the face, and it's one person. But when there's another one, and another one, each one dropping a stone in the water, and a ripple, and another ripple, and eventually it becomes a wave. And I believe that the American people are inclined in good faith toward that objective. It's only when they get distracted and they get confused. You know, there's so much stuff out there that they can't even figure out what's right. I mean, I'm retired now, and I'll bet you I spend at least 4 or 5 hours a day trying to figure out what really went on yesterday. And I check both sides, both sources, you know, from every angle I can think of. So it gets pretty hard, and there's a level of comfort grabbing onto whatever it is that's just passing you by rapidly, and what's written down. You ever notice how words vaporize, but those damnable texts last forever? Words have always been like that. Vision, our sense of vision is the most biased sense we have. I mean, it's the root of racism. It's the root of so many different maladies, of critique and ridicule. It's the source of your information that leads you to that. You can't do that through a sense of taste. You can't do it through the sense of hearing unless somebody's really bombastic. You can't do it with touch. It's sight. And as a consequence of that, we've got to discipline ourselves to a different way of approaching it. I know it's a terribly long answer, and I get really wired up, and I apologize for how long it is.
Thank you.
Maybe one more?
Hello, my name is Caroline Reeder. I'm a student senator as well for the College of Agriculture. You spoke quite a bit about issues perhaps that affect the nation universally, like communication and just being civic. But what issues do you see being relevant specifically to Montana as we come into the next 20, 30 years?
I'm sorry, but I didn't quite hear all of that. My wife tells me I'm hearing diminished, and I just told her I'm not focused. But I'm trying to focus, and if you wouldn't mind repeating it for me.
Yeah, so my name is Caroline Rader. I'm a student senator for the College of Agriculture. And my question is, you talked a lot about issues facing the nation universally with communication perhaps as one example, but what are issues that face Montana specifically that you think us as student leaders may need to address?
What issues are they specifically dealing with?
Yeah, Montana as a state.
I can give you one good example. I don't know if you recall, but there was a debate about the judiciary in the legislature. And the debate was that the Judicial Nomination Commission, which was created by the 72 Constitution in an effort to try and bring people from varied backgrounds into a commission setting and to draw a conclusion about who was best qualified as an applicant to become a judge. And it was really forward thinking when it was created in 1972. It's been mimicked all across the country because it provides, as best human beings can, as imperfect as they are, the opportunity for there to be a careful and thoughtful and fair deliberation about the qualifications of whoever's under consideration. And it worked well. I worked with that system for 8 years, and I thought the candidates recommended for appointment were well qualified, properly, I think, judged in the minds and hearts of those who sat on the commission. And yet, This year, out of all these years, without any evidence of any problem whatsoever, as far as I know, that has to change. And why did it have to change? Because there was an inclination for one party to secure more authority, more capacity to control. That's another one of the fatal flaws of politics and political optics. Everybody wants to control. And it's a natural human impulse. I mean, we're charged with controlling a lot of things on behalf of our own individual lives. But controlling everybody else's life and controlling every other process is not something that's either healthy nor that we're empowered to do. So they went forward anyway and passed the bill. So now, and this happens so infrequently, it's almost like Halley's Comet. That's how infrequently a judicial vacancy presents itself. But nonetheless, they wanted the power residing, in their presently existing leadership to be able to appoint judges that they saw as being the most qualified and ideal, probably for their cause. So what is that? That's a usurpation of authority and power that's temporary, and it makes no sense. And when you do that, I mean, it makes sense if all you want's power for today, but I can guarantee you it's going to change tomorrow. Nobody's in power forever. I mean, even Queen Elizabeth, even though she's been there all these years, she really doesn't have a lot of power. She's more, I have incredible respect for her. I love her. And I kind of like the monarchy to a certain extent, but she doesn't have any authority. Authority is a corrupter of human nature, and you have to constantly be on guard not to let it corrupt you. And because you're only going to get, if you have to exercise power, I found, you're going to only exercise it once or twice, because somebody else is going to set up the system in a way that doesn't allow you to do that. A good measurement is vetoes. When I was working there, I thought my job was to listen to legislators on both sides of the aisle. So if there was a good idea from a Democrat, it was a good idea as far as I was concerned. If there was a good idea from a Republican, it was a good idea. Now, I would have leaders come down because they have these images that somehow there's all this bartering and trading back and forth. And that's how things get done. That's not how things have to get done. That's not how things got done, but for some of those issues surrounding slavery in the Constitutional Convention. And I can tell you from practical experience that it doesn't have to be that way. There would be legislators from both parties that would come down and say, I would withdraw this bill if you'll do this. And I would tell them, no, I don't even want to know what the deal is, because I'm not going to do it. I'm going to judge each bill that comes in here on its individual merits. And I don't care whether it has an R attached to it or D. If I think it's in the best interest of the people I serve and it passes the people's legislature, then I'm going to look favorably on it, unless I think it's just an absolute disaster. And we have to get away from those games. And the herd mentality of Congress is absolutely unbelievable to me. And maybe it's so powerful I just don't understand it. But we send a lot of good people back there, and before you know it, they're marching in the same parade every day. And it's on both sides of the aisle. And I don't know how those group dynamics can be so powerful that everybody gets sucked into that whirlwind and can't get out. But when I was there, it works because I wouldn't make deals, and I worked with them trying to get a good idea passed. So in 8 years, I issued 5 vetoes. That's all. Because I thought those 5 were an absolute disaster. So it's things like that where I saw the relationships in the districting commission today that I thought were respectful, and that I thought were hardworking. They were full of integrity, and it kind of heartened me to see them acting as a quasi-judicial body, listening to the evidence, listening to everybody that wanted to talk, including me, very patiently. And the decision that they ultimately render, I'm going to accept, because I think they have proceeded in good faith to try and make the right call. Now, people in Gallatin County may not like it, because they may end up in the other district, or people in Park County, or people in Glacier County. But I'm convinced that at the end of the day, they're going to do everything they possibly can to come to the right conclusion. Those are the kinds of things. So any effort to try and secure power to your party alone is temporary. It's all temporary. And you should avoid that. You ought to be focusing on good ideas, not on power plays that might entertain for a moment but have no lasting value. I think that means I'm done. Thank you very, very much for letting me spend time with you.
Thank you so much to students for asking questions, and thank you, Governor Racicot, for taking the time to be here. Super valuable for students to get the opportunity to see you here, and I think you brought a lot of important and powerful knowledge to us today. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's give it one more time for Governor Racicot. I'm going to let Dean Lee take over for some closing remarks.
Governor Racicot, I think these students, 50 years from now, will say there was an afternoon at Montana State when a couple of seeds were planted in me. This was incredible. Thank you. It was at the right time that these students needed to hear you this afternoon. I can't thank you enough. I'm in awe. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for this extraordinary afternoon. Thank you.